The crash site smelled like burned ozone and something sweeter, like rain on hot pavement, but wrong. Evan Mercer had been hiking the Cascade Trail alone when the streak of silver split the sky and buried itself into the ravine 300 meters east of his position. He should have run. He didn't. That was the thing about Evan, the thing his ex-wife called recklessness, the thing his mother called her boy. He ran toward things that scared other people away. It had made him a decent search and rescue volunteer and a terrible insurance risk. His German shepherd, Mira, was already ahead of him, nose low, tail rigid. The vessel was small. Not Independence Day small, not city block leveling, planet-killing small. It was the size of a minivan, crumpled at the nose like a soda can someone had stepped on. Steam hissed from a fracture along its flank. The material wasn't metal. It was something between ceramic and bone, pale gray, warm to the touch even from 2 meters away. Evan crouched behind a fallen pine. Mira pressed against his leg, trembling, not from fear, exactly. She trembled when she was focused. He'd learned the difference. "Easy, girl," he murmured. Then he heard it. Crying. Not human crying. The frequency was slightly too high, the rhythm slightly too symmetrical, like someone had heard about crying and was attempting it for the first time. But the meaning of it, the raw, broken grief underneath the sound, that translated perfectly. Grief. Evan had learned from years of pulling people off mountainsides, from holding hands in hospital corridors, from sitting on cold floors at 2 in the morning. Grief sounds the same in every language that has ever mattered. He stood up. Mira was already moving toward the ship. There were 2 of them. They had crawled from a hatch on the vessel's underside, a hatch that now hung open like a broken jaw. They were small. Child-sized, maybe, though Evan had no real reference point. Their skin was the pale silver blue of a winter morning, their eyes enormous and dark, structured like insect eyes but softer, somehow, more liquid. They had 4 arms, 2 longer, 2 shorter, and they were using all of them to hold on to each other. They saw Evan and froze. Then they saw Mira. One of them made a sound. High, sharp, and they pressed together tighter, backing against the warm hull of their broken ship. Evan stopped walking. He crouched down, putting himself below their eye level. He'd learned that from Mira, actually. When you approached something scared, you made yourself smaller. "Hey," he said. Useless word. But tone, he'd also learned, was everything. He kept his voice low, kept it steady, kept out the part of him that was screaming aliens, actual aliens. What is happening? What do I do? Mira, to her eternal credit, did what Mira always did. She sat down. She looked at the 2 creatures with her soft brown eyes. She waited. The smaller of the 2, or what Evan assumed was smaller, based on the marginal difference in height, took a single step forward, then stopped, then took another. It crouched down in front of Mira and extended one of its smaller arms, slowly, the way a child reaches toward a candle, curious, a little afraid of being burned. Mira sniffed the offered hand. Her tail moved once. Just once. The small creature exhaled, all 4 shoulders dropping at the same moment, and touched Mira's ear. The second one, still pressed against the ship, whispered something. The words were not English. They were not any human language. But the cadence of them carried that particular weight that Evan recognized from the worst nights of his life. The weight of a child saying something they believed was true and terrible. He looked at them. "I don't understand," he said, "but I'm listening." They looked at each other. Some kind of communication passed between them. In the tilt of their heads, the ripple of color that moved briefly beneath the skin of their throats, something bioluminescent and subtle. Then the one crouching beside Mira looked up at Evan and spoke. The words were wrong. The sounds his mouth wasn't designed to make. But 3 of them, repeated, landed somewhere in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. "We were bad." He didn't know how he understood. Maybe the translator in the ship still worked. Maybe something about the way they said it, the way they curled inward when they said it, arms around themselves, eyes down. Maybe grief really did have a universal grammar. "We were bad. Mom left us." Evan sat down on the ground. Not because he had a plan. Not because he knew what to do with 2 small alien children sitting beside a crashed ship in the Oregon wilderness, apparently believing that their mother had abandoned them as punishment for their behavior. He sat down because that was the only response his body had. He had heard versions of this sentence before. He had heard it from a 7-year-old pulled from a house fire, who kept saying, I didn't mean to. He had heard it from a 43-year-old man on a mountain ledge who said my kids would be better off. He had heard it whispered and screamed and sobbed, and said in the flat, toneless voice of someone who had stopped believing anyone would argue with them. He sat down, and Mira walked over and put her head on his knee, and he reached out, slowly, telegraphing every movement, and rested his hand on the ground between himself and the two children. Not reaching for them, just present. You were not bad, he said. They watched him. I don't know what happened up there. He gestured at the sky, where the contrail from their ship was still fading. I don't know your story, but I know that look. And I'm telling you, whatever happened, a mother doesn't leave because her children are bad. The taller one made a sound. A question. Mira, Evan said, nodding at his dog. She was left behind too. Someone decided she wasn't worth keeping. He scratched behind her ears. Best decision they ever made for her. Worst decision they ever made for themselves. Mira thumped her tail on the dirt. The smaller one reached out and touched Myra's tail, then looked at Evan. Something in the look asked, how is she not broken? She decided not to be, Evan said. He wasn't sure if that was true or if it was what he'd told himself, but it had gotten him through some things, so he offered it. They stayed there for 2 hours. Evan called no one. He had no signal anyway, and he wasn't sure who he would call. Hi, found 2 alien kids in a ravine. Send help? The world wasn't ready for this. Maybe it never would be. But right now, in this ravine, it didn't need to be. Right now, there were only 4 of them. 1 man, 1 dog, and 2 children from somewhere far away who were cold and frightened and carrying a weight no child should carry. He dug through his pack. Emergency blanket. He shook it out, offered it. They flinched at the crinkle, then accepted it, wrapping it around themselves with the focused seriousness of children doing something important. He had trail mix, which they sniffed and did not eat, reasonable. He had water, which they regarded with what might have been curiosity. He had a battered paperback novel he'd been using as a journal, and when he showed them the pages, the taller one traced the letters with 1 small finger with an expression of such profound wonder that Evan had to look away for a moment. Mira lay across their feet. They let her. By the time the ship's emergency systems began cycling, a soft pulse of violet light from its hull, some automated signal calling for rescue. The smaller one had fallen asleep against Myra's side, and the taller one was sitting very close to Evan, not touching, but close. The taller one looked up at the sky, then back at Evan. More come, it said. Or that's what Evan heard. Okay, he said. You not afraid? Evan thought about it. I'm afraid all the time, he said honestly. I just don't let it make decisions for me. The creature processed this. The bioluminescence in its throat rippled. Amber, then gold, something warmer. We try, it said finally. That's all anybody does, Evan said. The rescue ships arrived 40 minutes later, silent, massive, materializing from cloud cover as though they had always been there. Beings descended. Taller, older, their expressions unreadable to Evan. They moved toward the children with purpose. Evan stood. He put himself just slightly in front of the kids without thinking about it. Pure instinct. The same thing his body had always done on mountainsides when he found someone frightened and alone. The tallest of the beings stopped, looked at him, looked at Mira. Then it placed a single hand over what Evan assumed was its chest and inclined its head, slowly, deliberately. He returned the gesture. The children were helped to their feet, wrapped in something warmer than an emergency blanket, guided gently toward the ships. The smaller one looked back once. It raised 1 small hand. Evan raised his. Mira barked. Once, short, the way she did when she was saying goodbye and meaning you're going to be okay. He'd learned the difference. The world wasn't ready for what came after. The broadcasts, the negotiations, the slow and messy work of 2 civilizations learning to share a sky. But when historians later asked what first contact had actually looked like, the answer that filtered down through decades was simpler than anyone expected. A man sat down on the ground. His dog wagged her tail, and 2 frightened children decided, maybe, that the universe wasn't entirely against them. It was enough to start.